Nodesignal, deine Bitcoin-Frequenz.
Herzlich willkommen bei Nodesignal, deine Bitcoin-Frequenz. Ich bin der Jan Paul und melde mich zur Blockzeit 862676 heute aus der Staffelpause bei euch. Ich habe mir den Reupload der Folge 118 gewünscht, The Question Concerning Bitcoin, in der ich mit Erik Cason sprechen konnte. Diese Folge gehört für mich zu einer losen Reihe, die wir aufgezeichnet haben und die ich im Nachhinein als die Bitcoinium-Reihe bezeichne. Diese Reihe begann in der Folge 110 mit Giorgio Agamben, Was ist Bitcoin? Darauf folgte das Gespräch mit Erik Cason, das ihr gleich hören werdet. Danach erst kamen die Folgen, die auch den Namen der Reihe tragen. Folge 134, Bitcoinium mit Gigi und Folge 171, Bitcoinium 2 mit Gigi und Giorgio. Die Kernfrage dieser Reihe würde ich so zusammenfassen. Was ist das Wesen von Bitcoin? Im Gespräch mit Erik nähern wir uns dieser Frage nach dem Wesen von Bitcoin zusammen mit einem berühmten Philosophen an, nämlich Martin Heidegger. Ich nutze die Gelegenheit, hier nochmal ein kurzes Intro sprechen zu können, um die Struktur und zumindest die allerwichtigsten Begriffe des Gesprächs einmal zu nennen. Ich erhoffe mir davon, dass ihr dem Gespräch dann etwas besser folgen könnt. Das Gespräch ist grob in 4 Teile aufgeteilt. Der erste Teil unseres Gesprächs klärt erstmal die Methodik, mit der wir vorgehen, nämlich das Sich-Fragen, auf Englisch Questioning. Im zweiten Teil sprechen wir über den kryptografischen Eid, auf Englisch Cryptographic Oath. Was sind Liturgie und Versprechen in Bitcoin? Dem folgt ein Teil, der von einem Hölderlin-Zitat seinen Ausgang nimmt. Wo aber Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auch. Zum Schluss kommen wir dann zu den 4 Causae, von lateinisch causa für Grund oder Ursache. Heidegger unterscheidet nämlich 4 Causae. Die Causa materialis, die Causa formalis, die Causa finalis und die Causa efficiens. Ich wünsche euch viel Spaß beim Hören. Focus on the Signal, euer Jan Paul. Herzlich willkommen bei Nodesignal, deine Bitcoin-Frequenz. Heute bringen wir euch ein Gespräch zwischen mir, Jan Paul und Erik Cason über die Frage nach Bitcoin. Bevor wir die Aufnahme des Gesprächs abspielen, möchte ich euch zur Blockzeit 789257 kurz erzählen und ein wenig motivieren, warum wir dieses Gespräch geführt haben. Wir hatten in der Folge mit Giorgio Agamben, Episode 110, Was ist Bitcoin?, eine intensive Diskussion, als wir darüber sprachen, ob Code Law sei. Giorgio vertrat hier die Pro-Seite, dass in Bitcoin der Code das Gesetz ist. Ich hatte die Kontra-Seite vertreten, dass es noch mehr als den Code gibt, nämlich Ideas and People, Nodes and Code. Bitcoin ist eben nicht nur Code, sondern auch eine Idee. Und wenn der Code der Idee widerspricht, dann korrigiert die Idee den Code und nicht umgekehrt. Ich gebe mal ein zugegebenermaßen stark vereinfachendes Beispiel. Sollten wir in einer der nächsten Versionen von Bitcoin Core einen Inflationsbug bekommen, in dem zum Beispiel mehr als 6,25 Bitcoin pro Block herausgegeben werden können, dann wird der Code korrigiert und spätestens, also wirklich allerspätestens in der nächsten Version, werden wir wieder zur Emittierung von 6,25 Bitcoin pro Block zurückkehren. Giorgio hatte dabei gute Argumente auf seiner Seite. Vor allem eins hat mich wirklich sehr nachdenklich gestimmt. Ideen sind subjektiv. Im Grunde kann sich ja jeder unter der Idee Bitcoin vorstellen, was er will. Und damit hatte er meine Position ja eigentlich ausgehebelt, dass es immer die Idee von Bitcoin ist, die den Code korrigiert. Denn wie will ich denn feststellen, was die universelle, wirklich von allen geteilte Idee von Bitcoin ist? Darüber kann es natürlicherweise ganz unterschiedliche Vorstellungen geben. Das Gespräch mit Giorgio hat mich dann wirklich nicht in Ruhe gelassen. Ich habe nach der Aufnahme wirklich noch lange unruhig im Bett gelegen, weil es mich einfach nicht losgelassen hat. Zur gleichen Zeit war ich mit Erik Cason, den wir dann gleich im Gespräch hören werden, in Kontakt getreten. Er hatte nämlich auf Nostr gefragt, ob jemand sein neues Buch lesen und kommentieren möchte. Ich habe schon ein paar Essays von Erik mit großem Interesse gelesen und war wirklich neugierig, was er zu sagen hatte. In seinem Vorwort zu seinem Buch, das den Titel Cryptosovereignty tragen wird, schreibt Erik, dass sein ganzes Buch im letzten Essay mündet, nämlich der Question Concerning Bitcoin, der Frage nach Bitcoin. Ich bin dann vom Vorwort direkt zu diesem Essay gesprungen. Diesem Essay ist ein Hinweis vorangestellt, dass man den folgenden Essay, also The Question Concerning Bitcoin, zwar auch für sich alleine stehend lesen und auch verstehen könne, aber es doch angeraten wäre, sich vorher mit Heideggers Question Concerning Technology, also der Frage nach der Technik, zu beschäftigen. Und es gibt einfach keine Zufälle in Bitcoin. Denn dieser Aufsatz von Heidegger, die Frage nach der Technik, das war der Text, den ich nach unserem Gespräch mit Ijoma spät abends im Bett liegend dann gelesen habe, weil ich mich irgendwie dunkel daran erinnern konnte, dass Heidegger in dieser Schrift dem Wesen der Technik nachgeht und ich gehofft hatte, dort vielleicht eine Antwort auf Ijomas Argument zu finden. Wie diese Antwort ausgefallen sein könnte, das hört ihr dann gleich im Gespräch mit Erik. Es wird sehr philosophisch, metaphysisch und selbst für meinen Geschmack an manchen Stellen etwas esoterisch oder spirituell. Wer sich tiefergehend mit den Themen beschäftigen möchte, der findet in den Shownotes Links zu den Themen, die wir besprechen. Das Gespräch fand auf Englisch statt. Als wir die Aufnahme begonnen haben, waren wir bereits tief im Gespräch. Deswegen startet die Aufnahme etwas unvermittelt mit einer Abwägung von mir zu den Vor- und Nachteilen, Heidegger auf Deutsch oder auf Englisch zu lesen. Nun wünsche ich euch viel Spaß beim Gespräch mit Erik Cason über The Question Concerning Bitcoin.
So what I was saying is, there's two sides to it, right? On the one hand, of course, you are missing out, and my go-to example is always das Gestell in Heidegger, the inframing.
Yes.
And I think the inframing, I'm not sure if there's a better translation for das Gestell, but the term stellen, it has so much more meaning in German. So like it's vorstellen, like imagine something. That's what the guy who creates the chalice does, right? He imagines the chalice and then that's what he's building, and he's herstellen, he's producing it. So just two examples of what I think is missing if you don't read Heidegger in German. But on the other hand, he's really hard to read because of he's so keen on etymology, right? Like finding the true meaning of the words, going back to the ancient Greeks and seeing, okay, what did they think about this term and what did it really mean? But that makes it really hard to understand and to read in German. But
absolutely,
if you have a translator, he helps you interpreting Heidegger because he gives you an interpretation, right? So I think it's kind of nice to read him in English or in any other language and, have some help starting to read Heidegger and understand Heidegger.
Well, it's interesting because this is sort of, and with him going back to the ancient Greeks, he has to make the same step that we have to make. And in a lot of ways, that actually does allow for sort of a triangulation that's really helpful. And that ties to Bitcoin really well because we're doing that triangulation now using essentially cryptographic etymology that now speaks in a language that we can understand and we can read, yet we can't speak. And that through that new and different understanding, there's almost a higher resolution language that we have specifically around value.
To be honest, that's one of the points where I'm still struggling to really understand what you're getting at. But so I'm really happy to have you on today and to ask you what you actually mean. But maybe it's better to start with a short introduction. I'm not sure how familiar you are with our German listeners. So maybe can you just quickly introduce yourself, Erik? Who are you?
My name's Erik Cason. I've been involved with Bitcoin since 2012. I was at Coinbase from 2013 to 2017, and then at Unchained Capital for a year. And I'm well known. I have a blog called Cryptosovereignty where I try to explore more of the philosophical aspects of Bitcoin, I wrote an article called The Question Concerning Bitcoin, which is modeled off of Heidegger's essay, The Question Concerning Technology. And so we're having a dialogue about that, which is really exciting because that's sort of almost the conclusion of sort of my first leg of work that's been over the last 10 years. That's now stepping into the second leg, which is really going to be about modeling Heidegger's idea of being through actually really Alexander Dugin's idea of the fourth political theory, but utilizing essentially the internet. And we're the first peoples of the internet that can utilize this technology to introduce a new form of the political, which is essentially the destiny of humanity in the technological age, in my opinion.
Okay, so that's the second step, or the next step. But let's do the first step first, right?
Yeah.
So you are about to publish a book, right, called Cryptosovereignty, which is actually a collection of your essays that you've written over the past years, right?
Yes, and through putting them together, I've realized that this is sort of a smattering of a constellation towards what I'm starting to call like a general theory of Bitcoin, which essentially is a philosophical approach to what is Bitcoin specifically in our age and how do we approach that through Heidegger's idea of being. Like how does Bitcoin inflect upon the being of humanity, and what does it mean for us as peoples that we now have access to this form of self-sovereign technology?
And you start, or maybe just to introduce, in the preface of your book, luckily you sent me a copy, or what is it? A pre-version of, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a preliminary copy of like the edited copy. So thank you for tolerating my grammatical mistakes and whatnot.
Okay. And you, from the very start on, you point out that this book is about the question concerning Bitcoin. But so all I did was I read the preface, and then I straight went to the question concerning Bitcoin, and I discovered that you are modeling this after Heidegger, which I really loved and appreciated. So I went back and read Heidegger, more than one time now, especially his article, The Question Concerning Technology. And I would like to start with maybe with a quote, because you also start your article with a quote. And you're quoting Heidegger, right? The beginning of his lecture, which is called On the Question Concerning Technology. And he says, "In what follows, we shall be questioning concerning technology. Questioning builds a way. We would be advised, therefore, above all, to pay heed to the way and not to fix our attention on isolated sentences and topics. The way is a way of thinking." So I think maybe I can ask you, what is meant by questioning as a way of thinking? How do you interpret that term of Heidegger?
Sure. And this is one of the places I've found Heidegger at first infuriating and now quite lovely, is that he structures things on almost an encrypted method so that you have to meditate on them to really unravel what's at the core of it. And I think to start with truly questioning what Bitcoin is, we have to ask, like, why is this necessary? Like, why do we need a digital money? And like, what implications does that really have for us? And I think, and this is one of the reasons why podcasting and sort of the whole Bitcoin information sphere exists, is that as we question more and more, we find it takes us deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, as we call it. And this truly is the first step in understanding what Bitcoin is doing, is just trying to think deeply and considerately about the question of why do we need technology in order to implement a form of sound money in the world today? Because this unravels, dozens of questions that can take us in all sorts of directions, whether that's, going to be philosophical, economic, social, and each one of these has legitimate areas of questioning that we need some degree of understanding in order to continue to graduate farther and farther down the rabbit hole, which I think once you get very deep down the rabbit hole, now very interesting ontological questions start to present themselves, because you really understand what Bitcoin means. And so like, now that we have this encryption technology, that the only way you can ever utilize it is through the private key, which we have proven methodologies for that. This stuff, if it is legitimate cryptography, it should maintain its ability through, into the deep future to not be hacked or modified or have the system changed in a meaningful way. And now you can really open up to like, okay, so what does this mean for humanity? How does this change what it means to be a person? And I think very much in the same way that the introduction of the Gutenberg printing press allowed for more people to read, which allowed for them to understand the Bible, which allowed for the advancement and the schism between Protestantism and Catholicism, which, really was the birth of the Enlightenment. And so we're very much at a similar time today. And in this essay, what I'm really trying to hammer at is that Bitcoin is fundamentally about a way of thinking in the digital age that allows us self-sovereignty through cryptography. And that's ultimately why my book is called Cryptosovereignty and not maybe Bitcoin sovereignty or something, is because of the specific form of sovereignty that is found in cryptographic techniques and the ability through that knowledge to perform a kind of self-sovereignty. And then within that, like, Bitcoin is really the first social contract that we have. And so I think that these are two issues that, while being very closely related, I think it's important to understand that differential.
Mm-hmm. That goes already very, very deep, but let me try to get it on at a little bit higher level, because I always have to think about our listeners. They don't have the philosophical background. So I think an easy way to understand this approach that Heidegger and you are choosing by questioning is to realize that if you ask something, right, if you ask about Bitcoin, if you ask Bitcoin, then you don't expect a truthful answer right now, right? It's not we ask and then we get a statement back. And that's the old way of philosophy, right? So, or not the old way, but that was rational philosophy. So we have statements and there are categories and we structure them. And to understand maybe is if we question something, we are trying to approach it. Maybe we miss it. Maybe we get only a glimpse of it and then it goes, it evades us or something like that. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So that's my understanding of what questioning means in Heidegger's sense.
Yeah, it's mulling it over, going over it again and again, because maybe there's something you missed the first time. Maybe it's almost a way that, like a good comparative is if you're an athlete of any sort and the critiquing of your form of doing the same thing, whether it's batting or kicking a ball or doing some sort of a technique, it's pouring over it again and again and again. Like, how can I do this better? How can I improve?
Oh, yes.
What can make that better? And through this sort of line of questioning, it's interesting because you sort of pull this thread that takes you farther and farther and farther. And I think the reason that this is the last essay in the book is essentially the whole book goes through this thread pulling, whether it's on a philosophical level, on an economic level, on a political level. And I think through that thread pulling, it's very similar to Heidegger's technique of questioning what is being, what is to exist, what is the meaning of that. And to me, as you pull that thread more and more, I think you actually come to one of the most important metaphysical conclusions that there can be, which is essentially, what does the philosophical, almost imperialism of logic form itself as in the digital age? And like, what is logic at its most true and deepest sense coming to itself and its home within humanity? And I think that logic only can take place and form through Bitcoin because of the promise that it is, the fairness that it entails, and the sort of artistry in which Satoshi presented it. So, and these are some of the details that I've been trying to flesh out in this essay, because I really want to make it not just about Bitcoin, but it's about the form of thought and logic that takes us through to the conclusion of why it must be Bitcoin and not necessarily something else, or just a various smattering of techniques of crypto suites and systems.
I think we've already touched a little bit on it, but I think what is really hard to understand, and I would like to discuss with you, is what is the role of language in technology? I think you had some points like you're using cryptography. What is it, and how does it tie in with language? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, and it's interesting you asked this, because this is sort of the question that like shoved me into the rabbit hole. Was I had this really interesting thing. I was like, why is it that Bitcoin can like maintain its oath to this supply schedule and only having 21 million? And why is it that like when my Bitcoin is in my wallet encrypted with my private key, that like nothing can break that? Like no matter how much military power or strength or consideration, there's no way to be able to bridge that gap to truly violate the oath that cryptography has to itself. And so I started to be like, so what's happening in language when cryptography has this oath to itself it must fulfill? And so I essentially, that helped me discover Giorgio Agamben's work. And it's a section of the Homo Secur series that's called The Sacrament of Language. Or is it? Yeah, the Sacrament of Language, the Archaeology of the Oath. And sort of in this, he makes the argument that like the oath is this sort of pre-legal jurisdictional thing in language itself to make sure that language has the ability to actualize itself. That like the oath has nothing to do with language in any semantical sense. It has to do with the ability for that to force its actualization. And so for me, I was able to go, okay, so if cryptography through language itself and the ability of mathematics to make it really, really hard to reverse to discover this number through reverse, that means it's fulfilling an oath that's something that no other being on the planet can fulfill. And what does that actually mean for humanity? That now there's a form of linguistic liturgy that I can engage in, that once it's encrypted, it has the total assurance of that remaining a secret through the sacrosanct that the private key is. And to me, this opened me up to seeing that there's something truly unique and special that's happening within this system that humanity has never seen before. And it's truly exceptional and important for that very reason and ability that it has to maintain its oath to its institution more than any other institution can do that.
Hmm. I have to admit that I had some trouble understanding the term oath, because in my understanding, an oath is something that I, as a human, can say, right? So I swear very easily. I swear, Erik, I'll pay you tomorrow, right? That's a very simple oath. But the problem is, if I don't pay you the money tomorrow, then my oath is not worth anything. And the challenge that I have is, the Bitcoin in that sense is a machine, right? It cannot say, okay, I'm not going to pay you. Once it's committed to, I'm going to pay you, not that Bitcoin is going to pay something, but you understand what I'm getting at, right? Well, once it's committed to something, it cannot get out of it. It produces, as you say, it produces just these yes statements, right? It's always yes. I think Tomer Strolight put it very nicely when he said it's a transaction verification machine. So you give some input, it says, okay, is this a true statement? Okay, it is. Happy. Good. Go on. Next. What's the next transaction? Let me check. So is oath really a good term or the right term here to use?
I think that's a pretty fair argument, to be honest. I don't know what other sort of linguistic, what else we could use to describe it. Because to me, it seems that through this ability only to say yes and to verify, it enters into the same realm of linguistics that within oathing happens, in that it demands its own actualization through what is within those statements and verifications. So perhaps oath isn't the best, but maybe there's some great German term that I'm unaware of that might fit
maybe.
But there's something about its ability to maintain its allegiance to what it says it will do, and also relating that all the way back to Satoshi and how it was originally created in its current form.
Mm. Interesting. I think I have to think about it, because it's really hard to understand. The oath, it sounds like an ancient term, right? That's what our ancestors did, right? They swore to a king, and then if they didn't follow the king, their heads were chopped off. But today, I mean, what is an oath worth today? And what I really like is to use the term oath with Bitcoin is, here's something that keeps its promises, right? It keeps its promises. It's going to have only 21 million. It's going to be censorship resistant. It's going to be confiscation resistant. And that promise is going to stay true as long as we have Bitcoin, or hopefully forever. So, as you can see,
is that promise an oath, or is it a demand, or is it like an actualization or a decision? It's really interesting, because this is the sort of stuff that I really enjoy thinking about, because in the same way, we could also say Bitcoin is actually a decision, but it's a decision of self-sovereignty. It's a decision that is reserved only for individuals who choose to interact with the protocol in that specific way. And to me, that's one of the places I'm critical of custodialship, is that you're not engaging in the true form of knowledge that is Bitcoin. Because to me, that's the biggest deal, is the implications of that sort of power knowledge structure that Foucault would call it, is that through the true understanding of how this works, you're now a more powerful individual that can prove your self-sovereignty through this, globalized digital tool of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the danger. That's a very Heideggerian term. He uses it a lot. It comes up, maybe to explain to our listeners, in his later stage, right? It's after being in time, and I think in the 30s and 40s, he discovers this the turning and the terms of the danger. So maybe can you explain a little bit what you took from Heidegger in this the danger that is present to us right now, and maybe later we can talk about what Bitcoin can do at this point where we are right now.
Yeah, and so specifically the terms inframing, framing, the danger, and the saving power are all part of this of late Heidegger, and they're featured in his question concerning technology. And so the idea of what inframing is this sort of core misunderstanding of the world, of everything is sort of an economic module of standing in reserve for people. So it's almost, and he uses a great example of like the Rhine is something to be dammed up to generate hydropower, and us misinterpreting the world in this specific mode introduces the danger, which he's always very elusive about the specific nature of the danger. But in those allusions, it's pretty clear that like the danger is this misinterpretation of what the fundamental nature of truth in the world is, and this discrete misunderstanding of nature itself. And he's also pedantic about, because this is from a Holderlin poem where he says, and Heidegger very much used Holderlin to help model some of his thoughts towards being. And he says that in the danger, the saving power grows. And so I think cryptography on a whole is like fundamentally a technique of war. And like, it's really interesting to like start this whole dialogue from a positioning of war and the tools that necessitate defending oneself inside of the context of war. And so really we can see Bitcoin in this huge overarching human development of it is a technique of war and an ability to keep something secret in light of the danger, the existential threat to human life itself, your ability to live. And so like, first I have to point out like, so what's this relationship? Like, why is it that Bitcoin at its very core is using these techniques that are developed from war in order to keep information secret, to have an asymmetric advantage in that war? Like, why is this going on? Like, why couldn't it be a database or something else? And so understanding that connection right there, I think, is extremely important, because you understand Bitcoin was developed out of the need to understand the true existential danger that the state itself is. And I think particularly Germans having a history with seeing what the Nazi regime did, there needs to be an understanding that didn't happen because there were just evil, maniacal people out in the world who wanted to destroy, but that like this is the very real danger that is introduced through the totality of what war is. By war being an acceptable premise of human life, there is a possibility that you can become the enemy and you can be killed and you can be destroyed. And to me, this is why Bitcoin is so important, is because it becomes a fundamental technique in understanding that existential danger, and the way that through understanding Bitcoin and this technique, it offers a saving power not just to a personal war that you could suffer under, but perhaps the possibility of all methods of war. And like, this is now where we start to open ourselves up to some really dynamic and huge questions of, if this is true and these techniques do operate as we understand them, what does it mean that humanity can now be unified by a single global digital censorship-resistant network that promises the self-sovereignty and the assurances and guarantees of that network towards any individual user who can actually utilize it correctly? And that, to me, is the saving power that's found inside of the danger, which is why cryptography and the internet was developed, the way that surveillance techniques are used on the internet, and the very real potential to be captured in this panopticon that is gearing up in the digital age that we see, surveillance agencies have.
Just one thought that came while I read your essay. I don't know if you have it actually in it, but you also talk about Carl Schmitt a little bit, right? And he famously coined the term that he is sovereign who decides on the exception, right? Something like that. Yeah. Okay. So, and the sudden realization that I had looking back at the past 2-3 years, that I'm not living in a state of exception is also, that's what the sovereign allows, right? He says, okay, right now you're fine. We don't need the exception, but always be aware, we can turn it around. So we can declare the exception situation. And that's something where I thought, okay, that was for me helping to understand the danger, right, that we're in. So in the state, if you want to put it absolutely in the totalitarian state, right, there's the sovereign who decides on the exception, and that right now we are living in kind of, he lets us live, right? So, but he's siding in on us a little bit, right? He's starting to, introducing CBDCs and surveillance techniques, and you've listed a bunch of those. So, yeah, I think Heidegger has a point here, right? So we have to discover the danger in can I say the danger in technology if we do not reveal the true essence of technology, which is not to be the stand-in reserve or to use nature as a stand-in reserve, but to use technology to reveal the world to us, to open physis to us. Is it something like that?
Yeah, I think that's quite eloquently put, is that is the true essence of technology. It's not to get all of the standing reserve that really is the current form and structure of the internet and its corporatism, but it's actually to deepen our own relationship with other beings in humanity in order to open us up to the truth that language contains in it, and to me, like, that's one of the most fascinating things, is that, like, this all metaphysically aligns with the return to truth from the age of fiat. And it's very important to understand that fiat in Latin, it's a declaration. It's let it be done. And so it fundamentally is in opposition to the truth. And that's why in Cryptosovereignty, I cover a lot of Hobbes's idea of Leviathan, and how in Hobbes's statecraft, he specifically says that that authority specifically comes from it's auctorus not veritas facta legitimum, which means authority, not truth, creates legitimacy. And it's important to understand that, like, in our current age, like, we're so deep into that nihilism of authority that most people believe authority is truth. And so we live in a pretty inverted world. And so Bitcoin, just through its introduction in our inverted world, through its speaking a radical truth, it becomes this monumental and fantastic power, specifically found in the danger, which is the misinterpretation of language and us returning it to its original origin, which is to speak truth.
Mm-hmm. Let's put one more point to this, because I think that's really important to understand, and to understand your thinking and Heidegger's thinking is, we should not just think in terms of the technological aspects of Bitcoin, but it's right. So we have to go, is it beyond or beneath? No, it's not. See, how do I start this? What I really think liked about Heidegger's approach is, if we use technology like cryptography to create Bitcoin, what Bitcoin is not some truth in the sense that we understand truth today as something that is, it's far from us, right? We do not know the truth. And Heidegger turns it around and says, wait a minute, if we create something like Bitcoin, or if we create some art, right? This is revealing something. It is revealing in the sense of it's bringing forth something, bringing something into existence, and thereby also revealing something about ourselves, maybe our relationship to the being that is there. So what I really want to point out, I don't know how I get there, but this point of, do not think of Bitcoin just in technological terms. Do not think of Bitcoin as, oh, it's just a bunch of code, and that when it executes, then it produces these 21 million Bitcoins. No, that's not true. We have to think about I have to say, what is the idea? What is the essence of Bitcoin? What is the nature of Bitcoin?
Yes, I really appreciate where you're going, because and it's only through this process of questioning it that there starts to be an unveiling, that you start to see beneath, is it just technology? Well, what is it when I'm in relationship with it? What does it mean to somebody who fled from Ukraine and had some of their savings? And once you start really asking all of these questions, you go, okay, so this is really about people and their relationship to forms of value in their current world. Okay, what else is there for value? Oh, it's this fiat thing. What does this mean? And so, like, it's gathering and assembling all of these things to deepen the questions and to ask more and more. So, like, what is the nature of these things? Why is it interacting with us? Why is it changing us? And I think what's even more interesting is a lot of people who have been involved deeply for a while, they talk about how it starts to change and transform them because of being exposed to it and their relationship to it and what is asked of them through that. And to me, like, that's one of the most interesting things currently for our people and our time is what, Bitcoin isn't assured now. It's not out there in the world for everybody. So we're almost given this very important and unique task to recognize what this technology means and to give it to other people, and the promise that that opens us up to, and this is where stuff really becomes fascinating, because not only are we returning to the truth in this very meaningful way, but we get to deliver that to other people in this nihilistic place that to me becomes a very deep spiritual mission. And that, like, look, I get everything is screwed up and it looks like everyone's trying to take advantage of you and nothing tells you the truth. But here is one thing that I can actually show you that will do those things if you're open to it, And yeah, meeting other people who get that is very personally transforming for me, because of the way that it saved me from a very deep depression in nihilism, because I didn't think there was any way to combat all of the bad in the world, which now I think Bitcoin truly can answer most of it.
Mm-hmm. So how do we overcome the urge to understand Bitcoin only as technology? And I would like to get to this, the purpose of Bitcoin, or the cause, the causa in Bitcoin. I think there is something very interesting in Heidegger and in your essay.
Yeah, well, and I think first of all is I'm really excited to see that there's all sorts of educational involvement with people in all sorts of different areas, and I think that that's one of the most important things is, like, everyone is welcome in Bitcoin, even our enemies. Like, that's part of its entire construct, is that, like, this is something that is good for all people, and it doesn't matter whatever allegiance they have. It is good for everyone to use Bitcoin. And I think by us really talking about how does it affect people, what does it call them to do, how does this actually change the structural relationship of humanity on a whole, and furthermore, as those of us in the West, what is our responsibility to the global South to say we love you and care about you as beings, and we entitle you to have access to the same forms of monetary wealth and savings as all people everywhere, and that no longer is the West entitled to their imperialism over all of you. And so I think it's a whole series and smatterings of questions that really need to go past just the technology and what the social and political promises within that technology are.
Mm-hmm. I was trying to get to the four causes that I think they're quite famous in Heidegger. The causa materialis, the causa formalis, the causa finalis, and the causa efficiens, or efficiens, as we say in German, or Latin, as we try. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, let me pull up the essay just because I know what you're talking about, but I'll parse all of this terribly if I don't look at it. Well, and so with these four ways, so essentially it's the material cause, the formal cause, the final cause, and the effective cause. And so the material cause is like the silver itself that it's made out of. The formal cause is its form and shape. So, like, why is it a chalice? Its final cause is, like, it's a chalice because we want to use it in a sacrificial rite. And then finally, like, what brings all this together? Well, it's the silversmith who, like, adequately thinks of these things. And so Heidegger has this as his model to talk about, like, this really deep idea of what technology is and, like, how we bring it forth into the world and the importance of trying to do that. And so if we look at this in the same way through Bitcoin, sort of this bringing forth through the four ways I'm trying to read it here. I'm trying to find it. So yeah, I analyze Bitcoin in the same way. And so like, what's the actual material itself? Like it's cryptography. Like that's what its structure is like its code itself, and then like what is it made out of? Well, we could actually say it's made out of energy itself. Like it's computational. We could almost even say it's thought, but because of the way that Bitcoin uses such a high computational amount, that transforms into real direct energy that's utilized in the world. And then the final cause would be like, what is the agreement that is Bitcoin? All the things that make us actually understand this is Bitcoin because we agree that it's Bitcoin. And then the most interesting one to me is that, so what brought all of these things together? It was Satoshi Nakamoto. And like, so, and what's important is that like Satoshi Nakamoto can only be known as this artist of Bitcoin. He has no other identity outside or beyond that. If he produced anything else, we wouldn't know it or understand it as being Satoshi's. And to me, this is sort of the Promethean thing that Satoshi did, is that he took this very, very narrow window of where we had all of this sophisticated cryptography that couldn't be broken by an entity, no matter how powerful or how much computational strength. And yet the surveillance apparatus wasn't powerful enough to locate anybody that it desires as it could do today. And that Satoshi, in this very small window, was able to appropriately gather together these various materials, particularly from the inspiration of failed prior non-state money projects, and cobble them together and produce it into the world in such a way that his art was actually known and understood what it was to be. And he used cypherpunks as his vehicle to sort of birth that vehicle into the world. And I also think it's important that, as incredible of an artist that Satoshi was, like this was kind of a cobbled together retarded thing at the start. Like Bitcoin had a lot of issues and it wasn't perfect by any means, but through the dream that this sort of half amalgamated thing was, all of, some of the most brilliant and important cryptographers in the world got on board, helped develop it and change small bits and parses of its code to produce what we now have today as the Bitcoin we know and understand. And so all of these things are very important in understanding how and why Bitcoin actually operates as a means of self-sovereignty. So sorry if I went in a different direction from what
no, that's absolutely fine. I would like to take a step back again because I have actually a question about some of this. So the first cause that we have is the causa materialis, so the matter out of which is Bitcoin actually created, right? And my understanding of in your essay was that it's not just the code, or it's not, as you put it, Bitcoins are not physical objects, but it is this thing that is produced through the code and through its users who use Bitcoin, right? By sending transactions, for example, or by mining, that they create this, a new, how you put it, a new Theia, a new Usia. That Theia is I think it's a goddess, or it reminds of goddess, and Usia is also something like essence or nature.
Yeah, and substance,
exactly. So what I thought I understood was that the material or the matter out of which Bitcoin is created is not the code, right? It's not some computer program that is running, but is this time chain that is created. And the time chain, it has its integrity, right? It's something that Ralph Merkle discovered, right? He described it as a living being. So that's what I, right? As what I really like is Adam Gibson. He puts it like it's the reification of information, right? It's not just data put next to each other, but the whole data set that is created that has its own purpose, its own substance, its own living essence, so to say.
Well, and this is one of those really hard points to grok, is that like this little turn here in that understanding is really important, because it's not the code, it's the way that we read and understand that code. And now that there's now a linguistic exchange that's happening, that all of the information in there is in order to ensure that like that is a singular and unique event that happens linguistically. And so we'll never confuse it with any other event that happens because of the uniqueness of that. But if we don't have the private keys to it, it's just gobbledygook. It's just noise. And so like this is sort of this very strange inversion that's happening because like now we're speaking in a language where we're not thinking about it as speaking or as sort of a verbal agreement. And yet it is still an interaction that's happening that way. And like that's what I'm trying to point out is like, that's what's happening. That's really important. And now that we have access to this form of language, this opens all of humanity up to something new and different and transformative for all of us.
It sounds like a language that nobody speaks, but some of us can understand, right? That's
Yes.
what it is. Nobody knows actually how to speak.
There's a very important word for the ability to read and understand something but not speak it. And that's called tetragrammaton. And it's the way that in ancient Hebrew you would read the word God, Yahweh, but you were not allowed to speak it because the moment that you spoke it, you profaned it. And this is very similar to a private key, that we see it and we know it, but we'll never speak it out loud or expose it to the internet directly because that profanes that private key. You know, and again, this is a very strange idea, but like I very much believe what we're doing with Bitcoin is we're entering into this sacred agreement that used to be reserved through magic and liturgy and the oath that was fulfilled only through saying, I'm taking on the word of God. But ironically, in the fallen world where we live in nihilism and no man is capable of fulfilling the being of God, we have to go to Heidegger's last God. And the last God to me is cryptography and the promise that cryptography can fulfill. But we will only know that at the end of entropy, right?
That's what Heidegger, I think, means when he says we are in an in-between time, right? We had these lots of gods that explained the world to us or helped us understand the world. And right now we've killed God, right? So Nietzsche said it, God is dead. So that's done. All rational thinking about God is done. But what Heidegger is showing us, and I think what maybe, I'm very careful here, but maybe this is something that Bitcoin is also showing us. It's the coming of God, the messianic nature that is in Bitcoin. It promises a new God, which I think most of our listeners will hate me for saying that Bitcoin is a religion.
Sure.
But
and I get how you immediately retract and go, oh my God, I'm like, I get it. Like, it's a very triggering term, and I wish we had a different dialogue. But to me, this is also, and this is sort of where the next leg of work goes, is that to me, Bitcoin is the beginning of true metaphysics, because now that we have this sort of last god of cryptography and the promises that it entails, and this dovetails nicely to Alexander Dugin, is that in his fourth political theory, he talks about like angelology, which is like a method in order to be able to try to fulfill the fourth political theory through new techniques of knowledge, which in a lot of ways, I see crypto systems and AI as being that sort of stuff. But really what this is that it allows for us to return to a world where there is a capital T truth and a metaphysical nature of things, that through the methodology of true questioning and not just allowing for authority to replace the methodology of questioning, we return to a world that God promises us, one where mystery remains, and that the self-sovereignty of man to create a world in which he gets to inhabit as his home forever becomes a truth. And we can extricate ourselves beyond the death of God. And what I think is really interesting is specifically in The Gay Science, where Nietzsche writes about the death of God, he asks, what rituals can we do to reform ourselves or rescue ourselves from this? What methods do we have to wipe the blood clean from this? And to me, like, this is sort of the answer. The ritual is the liturgy that is cryptographic encryption and the ability to be able to utilize specific forms in order to create this new form of assurance.
I know it's very hard to talk about Bitcoin as a religion or being a religion or seeing something a divine substance in Bitcoin, but I'm very open to it. I actually put out a tweet a few weeks or months ago where I said Bitcoin is a religion. To me, this is very clear, but I'm still hesitant to talk about
it's that word.
Yeah,
that
maybe
word
it
is really triggering. And I get it, because like we see organized religion as being an authoritative form that tells you how you are supposed to live, and that there is supposed to be a grander thing outside and beyond you. And again, returning to Heidegger, like this, what I'm trying to do is honor the true form and power of mysticism and what it means to have revelatory thinking and a deeper sense of being and existence that unifies humanity. You know, and something that I've been pretty open about is like, I'm a huge fan of psychedelic drugs and the ability that they have to open people to transformative experiences. And I think one of the best things people can do is a very heavy dose of psychedelics and have an ego death experience. And because there's nothing like it, there's nothing I can tell you about it that will move you about it, but it is truly a deep and transformative experience that, in my opinion, helped resolve nihilism in me, not just because I had the experience, but I also had the scaffolding beyond that. You know, like to me, the psychedelic experience was clearing the way to understand that nothingness itself is godliness, you know, but it's the truest nothing, the deepest nothing, the most, you know, the clearing that is the opening, that is the potentiality of being itself and what that is. And so I welcome people that might recoil heavily at this to, first, I understand it, but second is just be open to it. And not necessarily even to the idea of a religion, but maybe just that there is something spiritual and purposeful to this. Because to me, this is the most important aspect of Bitcoin. We have all been given a very important mission to humanity, and that is to be the stewards of the new global monetary system that can be fair and open and transparent for all people everywhere. That's very important.
So I'm so happy to discuss all of this with you. So it's so great. The challenge that I have is I used to think of Bitcoin as a moral idea. So that's where my religious inclinations come from. So I think there's something, there is some morality to Bitcoin. And what is confusing me right now is that Heidegger doesn't have an ethics or he doesn't, or as far as I know, I don't see it that he has some kind of ethics, right? So it's it's a more metaphysical approach, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is I use his student Emanuel Levinas to bridge this gap. Because
the other is one of the best things you can read. I recommend it to all of you guys. Go read Emanuel Levinas. If you want to understand Heidegger, it's one of the best approaches is to read one of his students. And Emanuel Levinas is from my point of view, from what I've read, he's one of the greatest thinkers and writers about this type of stuff. I'll let you go, Erik. Sorry, I had to say it.
No, I appreciate you saying, truth and method. He bridges Heidegger, but like just his introduction to that, it always moves me to tears, because like in his introduction, he's trying to establish, like, is war a fundamental aspect of human existence that we must accept or no? And it's incredible because this is Totality and Infinity, not Truth and Method. But in Totality and Infinity, he uses this to essentially bridge the gap with Heidegger to insist that ethics actually take a superior existence to philosophy itself. And I think Heideggerians had a strong ability to be able to keep Levinas on the ropes until Bitcoin. Because I think with Bitcoin, there is a way to insist upon a form of essentially philosophical economic imperialism, which is a really weird idea. But that's truly what Bitcoin is. And it only is able to insist on that economic imperialism through how broken fiat is, and explicitly through the ethical insistence that having a sound money with a limited supply is a legitimate cause for beings in the world. And that only happens at like the end of fiat and nihilism, where we're captured so deeply in this totalitarian panopticon that like this is the only hope that man has to extricate himself, is through the insistence of ethics vis-a-vis technology.
I think that were really great last words, Erik. Thank you so much for coming on to Nodesignal.
Hey, we
just
can
want to
keep
say,
going if you want. I'm loving this.
yeah,
This is great.
we can just talk. I want to think about our listeners, right? So we are already talking 50 minutes, and my idea is to put an introduction before we start to talk in German, where I try to introduce Heidegger a little bit and some of the ideas that we talk about. And some terms like the chalice or the inframing and the danger, so
That's wise. It'll be helpful for folks.
Yeah. So this episode is going to be maybe 1.5 hours long. So that's more than we should do in a podcast, I think. So Erik, thank you so much for coming to Nodesignal. Anything you want to share with our listeners? Where can they find you?
You can, Twitter is the best place to find me. Just my name, ErikCason on Twitter. You can find me on Nodestory as well. That's I post all my craziest stuff there. And also, if you want to read any of these essays, you can find most of them at Cryptosovereignty.org. And my book will be coming out probably sometime this summer, and that'll have all of the essays collected along with a couple of little bonus content. So,
okay. Thank you, Erik. And to our listeners, as always, focus on the signal, not on the noise. Bye-bye.
Nodesignal. Focus on the signal, not on the noise.